So we're talking about entrepreneurship, and I'm hoping that you will read these bios in full on your apps because there's not even time enough to read all of the things that the women here have accomplished. So I want to start by asking this question, and any of you that want to share, what's the moment when you know it's time to step out and found something? I feel like every person that becomes a founder is sitting in some place that's not, you're doing your own thing. Maybe you were working for someone else, maybe you're doing a totally different career, and then it was time to step out. What was that moment that you knew, this is time for me to found something new?
Well, I'll just say, because that question, I can't believe you just asked it today. Today is 18 years of the day I started Fabric. And started meaning not open my doors. It means that I put on my favorite outfit and went downtown I didn't have a building, I didn't have an employee, I didn't have a piece of clothing, but I decided that I would, in a year, have my first store, and quit my job and went downtown and got a piece of paper that said Fabric was incorporated. And they're like, what's the address? I'm like, I gave my home address. They're like, well, what type of clothing? Like, it's just amazing clothing. But I could see it, the vision was there, but I needed that piece of paper for the accountability and make that decision that this will happen. Like, it gives me chills because I think that day was probably a bigger step in any of it than actually opening the doors and making that decision of, I'm going to make a big change in my life. And the people I told were like, you're crazy, like, you have a great job. So I think making that decision and having that piece of paper, I mean, I walked back home and I was like, I've got a paper that says that I could have a company. I think you do it online now. You don't have to drive down there. But that was it. And I always add in that night I went to celebrate and met my husband. So very good night, August 1st, and opened my store 1 year later. So, and now I get to be here talking about it on the same day. So that, for me, when you make that kind of emotional, spiritual, mental decision, that's huge. So pick a date to make that, because the rest follows.
Hey, Eileen and I opened the doors to our business less than 3 weeks ago, so we're on the other end of the timeline. But for me, it was more of a perfect storm. I had been in corporate for 20 years and always been in fun, creative jobs, but then I had 2 kids back to back. The election happened. I launched a show called Full Frontal with Samantha Bee, and I just think it was a moment in time for me that was like, this feels broken. The work system doesn't feel like it supports me as a parent. I think stuff is going on in the world that I care more about. And I think that all just come together was just like, I have to go and do something different. I have to build a better world for my kids. And I just want to do something that means more to me. I would like to say it was smooth and clean and a quick decision. It was not. It was messy and took me 2 years to quit, and I should have made the decision quicker, but I think you kind of have to sometimes do a little soul searching in that process and really figure out who you want to be and what you want to do, and that takes you to the right decision. So I have not looked back. I have not regretted one day. Everyone said I was insane, crazy, what are you doing? You have a good job with a paycheck. I haven't looked back.
Hi, I'm Eileen. I started a company in 2011 in my late 20s. I would like to say the moment was filled with a lot of naivete and conviction that there was this idea that we had to bring it to fruition. And sort of when I look back and we grew that company, myself and my business partner, over 8 years, that was, it worked out well, but I still think that being naive also helps. The second time around with Martine, I was moving from New York here, and I was the COO of a nonprofit that we grew to about 40 people and over 1,000 followers across the country, and was trying to figure out what to do next. I knew we were coming to Atlanta and didn't really have a plan, and I started getting some people reaching out. I got a couple of job offers to be CEOs of other nonprofits. And I remember my husband being like, holy cow. I told him the details. It's like, yeah, twice as much money. They'll let me work wherever. And he was like, this is amazing. And then I looked at him like, I don't want it. And he was like, and he's risk adverse, which is always good to have a partner and spouse who's who's not, and he just couldn't, he's like, I don't understand. Like, isn't this what we were all hoping for? I was like, no, I think, and that was the moment where I realized, I was like, I think I want to start something else. And, you know, I was raised as a first-generation Korean American immigrant to truly believe that money equaled success, and to say no to a big fat paycheck and to not go without salary for another few years. That made me realize, I was like, wow, I really want to do this. That's weird. I didn't think that would happen again.
Thanks, Eileen. Hey, y'all. I think that the road to starting something is super unique to each person. Even for myself, I've started what I'd consider 3.5 companies. Half, it's getting there. And for me, each one started really differently. And so I'm going to share a little about each one just in case it speaks to wherever you might be. So my first company I started with my twin, and I started it in the peak of the recession, which is probably the stupidest time to start a company. But I did it because I had been laid off 3 times back to back after graduating from college. And I kept thinking, like, this tale I've been told of go to school, get good grades, get the job, check the boxes, success is defined as fill in the blank, isn't working. Like, I'm giving my all, I'm toiling, I am blood, sweat, and tearsing the hell out of this. And yet my jobs are going away like this. I just show up to work one day and they're gone. And I thought, when I look back at my childhood, the thing I was doing constantly was starting little businesses on the sun porch of my parents' house, selling crap to people that, like, didn't want it. But I was like, come on, buy this. And I just realized that it was in my DNA, that this was something I'd always wanted. And I didn't know the term entrepreneur at the time. This was 10 years ago, and that was pretty, you know, pre it being so cool and rock star as it seems to be now. But that really started to make me realize, how do I choose and define the path for myself rather than just going down the path that's been laid out before me and the one that people are telling me to take? And then 2 years into that business, I had a friend move back to Atlanta from law school, and she said to me, where can I go to make friends after college without getting hit on, sold to, everyone being my parents' age or in my own industry? And I laughed, and I was like, I have no idea where that is. But I said, my favorite thing in the world is to connect people, so why don't I start it for you? And I thought I was just making this, like, one-off event to help her meet people in that nature. And 8 years later, I have a 30,000 person networking events company. And it became this full-fledged business. And again, I was listening to opportunities there, just backing into, here's something where my skills and the world's needs are matching, and it turned into a business. And then the half business was, as the recession was in full swing, and I watched people have their financial lives crumbling, which I'm a believer that we don't talk about money enough, and that it really is this underpinning foundation for a lot of the rest of our sanity and ability to create the change we want in the world. So as I'm watching this go down and I'm realizing, wow, I was really fortunate to have parents teach me these tools as a child, I decided to write a children's book on financial literacy to teach those tools early. So again, I wasn't looking out at the lens and thinking, how am I gonna write this kid's book one day? I had no plans to write a kid's book. I don't even have children. But I thought, here's a need, and here's something I love to write. Let me just do that. I have the skills. So that was a different way of doing it. And then lastly, I hit this point more recently in my career where I thought, I've spent the last decade learning intentionally and growing and finding mentors and collaborators and having access to things that not everyone is so fortunate to do. And I wanted to be intentional about giving back with that. So I shifted and made my businesses almost entirely passive and working without me in them, which is a whole other story. And then decided to take my work and move in a direction that I just felt called in my gut. So that's really the fourth one, is my instinct was like screaming at me, like, you need to move in this direction. I was so terrified to do it, to start teaching other people how to design their lives and define success for themselves, build businesses to fund that definition, not squash it, and networks to open the right doors and support them through that process. And each one of these businesses started differently, but I had to pay attention to the cues around me and my own internal cues.
Wonder what you guys think about this. The real answer is you never really know the moment, too. Because I have so many people that say, how did you know it was going to work? Like, I still don't know if it's going to work. Like, that, don't be afraid to jump in. I can tell you most of the women in my life are in this limbo phase of, my whole heart's saying I should be doing this. Then go, do that thing. Fail at it, but do that thing. And whenever I get chills, I've got them twice today. That kept me from doing it for a while. You said 2 years, do it. That's not gonna change. You're never gonna get a certainty note, email, text that says you are now doing the perfect thing for you. But do it, because you will stay in limbo for ever unless you do. Don't wait for all the right answers or the perfect moment when you walk out in the sun and the wind says, yes, today's the day.
I'm sorry.
Unless y'all had that moment. And
So I want to build on that really fast because I think the two biggest things I hear from people that hold them back from taking that step are the fear of what other people are going to think and the fear of failing or like not being good enough or some of that lack stuff, the scarcity. One is you don't fail if you don't stop. And two is people are not paying as much attention as we think, and it's actually a little bit, like I was guilty of this too, a little bit egotistical to think that they're paying that much attention. So it's actually, I found it freeing when I realized that people aren't paying that much attention, so I can be free to fail, I can be free to mess up, I can be free to try and keep iterating. And having a career in like 17 different industries, like I met Dana 13 years ago selling her jeans. That's where I started, and here we are. So like, no one's paying attention in the best way.
Dara, you brought up a great point when you were talking about money, and that when we have our idea, when we have this moment that all of you described you had, where you're like, okay, this is it, this is a thing that I know I want to begin, I want to start, money. If I have a product, if I need a physical storefront, there are all these thoughts, and I feel like for a lot of us in this room, and probably for many of you, you're having these thoughts of, well, how do I fund this? And when we're talking about entrepreneurship and women and the statistics between how many men are getting capital, how many women are not getting capital, and even disproportionately how many women of color are having an even harder time getting capital to start their businesses, what would be anything from your own story or advice you would want to share for budding entrepreneurs in this room about how to tackle funding, how to think about how you're going to have capital to start your idea?
For us, we opened a brick and mortar, so you need a lot of money for that. Ideally, I think we're probably all firm believers of if you're able to bootstrap it or just get something out there and test it and get feedback. For us, it worked a little bit different. You know, we sent out surveys, we hosted events, but that just made us more confident that we needed to open our own space. And yeah, the how it's harder to fundraise as women comes up so much to the point where I think oftentimes we want to remind ourselves, like, don't just think about that when you're going into a pitch, because you know you want to be unbiased as possible, but a lot of people, there is that unconscious bias. It's hard. I mean, when most of my friends that are starting companies that I talk to, they're all men, they're white, and when I get their advice, I sit there and listen, and they're either living in New York or Silicon Valley, and then I quietly listen, and then I say, do you think this would be the same case if you were a woman? And like, they have nothing to say. It's different tactics. I think it's different in Atlanta than in a city versus New York and Silicon Valley. So for us, it's been an uphill battle, but I can't like necessarily pinpoint an exact moment. It's because we're a woman. If anything, because we're building a product and a service for a woman. If we talk to certain potential male investors, they just, if they don't understand, a lot of them will react in, I don't understand how this could be legal. And then we'd like to say to them, oh, it's because it's the first time you've never had access to something in your entire life. But so there's, there are nuances to that, but absolutely it is an uphill battle. We ended up taking out an $100K loan with the city of Atlanta, and don't get us started. That was incredibly difficult as well. We are still raising money. It's a hard battle, and I think you have to do what's right for you, but also understand it's not just everyone talks about the statistic that 2% of venture capital dollars go to women. You don't have to go for venture capital dollars necessarily. There are so many other forms of alternative funding that are available, and there are so many cool organizations and groups that are creating funding for women and entrepreneurs of color. So.
And I would add to that, I think our journey kind of forced us to approach it in a way that maybe we wouldn't have approached in the beginning, because we needed that capital up front to open the space. And I think, we went out, we took our deck, our idea, and we were saying, hey, this is a great thing. And everyone's like, that's awesome, tell us when you're open. And we're like, yeah, the thing is we need the money to open. So what it did was force us to kind of come at it in a different way, in a more creative way. And we started doing events a year ago at the Hotel Claremont, and have done over 100 events and had over 1,000 women come through. And what that did was we didn't have the nut over our head that we were having to pay rent, but it gave us a chance to build an audience and build an awareness and try and test some stuff out. And it also, I think what I've noticed as we've kind of got closer and closer to opening our actual kind of product is that people see more and more things happening, more and more women coming, more and more people signing on, us doing stuff. And I think it's just given them the confidence that, we're not just, two people out there sharing an idea that might be here today and gone tomorrow. And it's given them a chance to build some confidence in us. And then we knew this would happen the minute we opened our doors, that then suddenly people start coming out the woodwork. Oh, it was so great to meet you a year ago. Now we kind of more interested in kind of getting involved. So I think you have to kind of do things that just put the name out there, put the word out there, start building things, because over time people will get confidence in you, whether you're a man or a woman, and then come and join the party with you.
Really quickly, because I don't know if Dana took any investment. I have always bootstrapped, and when I started, it was this choice of, one, I didn't even think about bringing on money, but I think, like Eileen said, there's this intention around what kind of life do you want your business to help elevate for you, and for me, I didn't want to have a boss, so to speak, of an investor who I had to answer to. Plus, I've always chosen, at least so far, capital unintensive businesses that took very little to get off the ground, so that I could kind of wade my toe in and not feel like it was some massive leap into a chasm to figure it out. And there was a time where even when I was bootstrapping the business, I took a loan from my mom in the early stage because I wasn't prepared to start a business. I'd been laid off back to back to back, and I didn't have a big fund of reserves to get me there. And most businesses take a while to have the cash flow to even pay you. And so that was something that was really interesting for me, because it created this new dynamic with my mom where she was sort of the lone person, and it made me feel an immense amount of guilt around if I'm going to dinner, if I want to do anything for pleasure, like how does that present to her? And I know I have some friends who have been a part of this community who have shared that as nonprofit leaders or otherwise, that there's this stigma of, well, can I enjoy myself? Can I step out of the business? What happens if it's not in the place where it needs to be to pay it off? And so the moral of my roundabout story is simply, you have to choose, like anything, what really works for you, and you have to sit with that. And I think that's something that we're not taught a lot, is to pause and get centered with yourself and understand, what is it that I really want, and how does this business or the way that I'm choosing to fund it elevate that or not?
I'll be brief, but it's about sacrifice. I mean, we can all probably say this is the hardest part of us starting a business, and I think that that's a really good thing, because you don't want to just jump into something with a loaded weapon saying, I'm going to go start a business. This is real stuff, right? And you can have the passion and the excitement for it, but you got to have the answers to the questions. And I think that's what was so incredible for me after 14 banks saying no. I don't think they said no because I was a woman. They said no because my business plan wasn't strong enough. And I loved that part. It was such a refinement piece of get it together and make it be something more than an idea before you're going to go ask somebody to give you money for it. And you know what? Make sure you'd give money to it. When you say, how can I fund my business? Would you fund your own self? Would you give yourself that? And those are the questions that I make everybody ask who's coming to talk about this, because that's the key. Would you sell your house for it if you needed to? Would you sell your car? Would you? Because that's when I got finally, after the 15th bank, a $70,000 line of credit, which kind of means you don't really have any money. You just have this line, and that you got to keep paying back, and you're just hoping for it all to happen. But that's where I started the very first store, paid that line off in a year, and then have been debt-free ever since then. But not because millions of dollars came, but I was so intentional in making sure that I cared about the finances of my business. And then, yes, you can go get people to give you hundreds of thousands of dollars, but you owe it back. Or I believe that we owe it back, because that's what a business does. It funds back that so that you're growing. So think about that. Don't be scared of it, but do say that's going to be a sacrifice. And like, I'm a vegan now, but I lived off macaroni and cheese. Like, I don't eat cheese or macaroni now. I lived off of that. No lie. I was working at Deloitte & Touche. I was working at a boutique on the weekend, and I was writing this business plan, and there was nothing that was going to stop me. And that prepared me for the real game, which was having a business. So think about that, and don't let it discourage you, but do let it really think. Getting money is hard because people want questions. They want to know, what am I giving money to? It's got to be more than like, I want to open this really cool boutique. And my bankers helped me get there by asking me, what are you going to use it for? I'm like, oh, I'm going to do all this cool stuff. They're like, yeah, if you could define the cool stuff, then come back and let us know. We'll talk to you.
Dana, I want to ask you another question. In your business, you've had the opportunity to scale that business. having to go from one fabric boutique to multiple locations. That also meant it goes from you being the primary person that's like doing these particular things to now having employees. Can you talk about what has been your experience in scaling a business and taking that business beyond you being the primary person doing all the things you start out doing in the beginning?
Yeah, it's such a great question, and it could be a 2-hour-long therapy session as well, because there's panic attacks in there. Because this is the reality. You can do it all yourself and be a control freak, and then fall asleep every night at 2 a.m. and wake back up at 4 and do it all again and say, yay, I did it all and I'm exhausted and I can't get through all this. Or you can choose to let people into your vision, and it becomes something bigger and better than you've ever imagined. And that's luckily what happened to me, but it was tough. It was so tough, because what I chose to do after I was growing stores is I made a promise to myself. I was at Deloitte, I was traveling all the time, and I made a promise, that night I met my husband, that I was gonna live a life that could be home and have friends and not be gone all the time. Well, that meant all these other locations like Raleigh and Austin, and everybody wanted a fabric, and real estate people are calling, and I'm like, but I don't live there. So what I chose to do, which is extremely still hard for me right now, and I really do say, think about your personality type. I chose to franchise with other women like you. And I said, okay, this person knows their community. This person loves business. They love fashion, and they love serving. So you do that in Raleigh, you do that in Austin, you do that in Columbia, and then we'll all do it together. And so what has to happen, what I had to break, and I don't call it like a transition, I had to break the idea that this was my thing. Because it became everybody's thing, all the bad that comes with that, but all the good that comes with that. The good totally outweighs it. But there is, I'll use the word bad, like we're supposed to use words like the opportunities and no, it's the cry yourself to sleep, like she's not doing it the way I want to do it. Like, why does she even put the red shirt even next to the black shirt? Nobody would ever do that. But that's the stuff that like I stopped sleeping about until like it was a long transition to say, you know what? We're gonna all do this together. They're gonna do it. That's the cooler thing. I have interns come in and I'm like, that was awesome. I don't even know how to do what you just did. You were better at me. And I learned to say, you are better at that than I am. Oh my gosh, in the beginning, I'm like, it's my thing. I know it better than anyone else. Blah, 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 blah. And now I'm like, come on in, teach me something, and I will be the student. And it takes a while to get there, but you cannot grow if it's all about you and your vision and people are waiting for you to say some big vision. A, it's exhausting, and B, I don't really know if that's what God had planned for me to have a store that I was growing. He brought in hundreds and hundreds of women with really cool ideas. But do check in with yourself, and if it starts to feel like this thing's growing and it doesn't feel right, that's okay. It feels so different, and it's breaking the idea of, okay, it's almost like, and I don't have a 16-year-old, but like when your kids go to college, like women talk about that, I'm like, that sounds like my company. Like they gotta go fly and grow and do all that stuff. I'm like, no, it was really fun when I was like, don't do that and do this. So yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but it's a really, investors we have never taken investment. They've come along the way, throughout the way, and it just hasn't been a choice I've wanted to make. It's been very tempting. But for me, it's not about how big we get, it's about how intentionally we keep heart. And unfortunately, most of the people that were coming in to invest would be like, blah, 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 on Free Fabric and Asher Line, let's scale. And I'm like, are we scaling the financials? Are we scaling the heart? Because my mission's high style with heart, and you're scaling a lot of the high style. So I've kept it close because of that reason. And I'm completely open to it, and I still have those conversations. Always be open, but always be really rooted in the thing that you don't want to change to.
Yeah, thank you. Eileen and Martine. Oh, I love how your names rhyme. Oh, it's a jam. Okay. Many of us have experience, obviously, working in various spaces that were not women only. But I have learned that it's important for us, personally and professionally, to have some safe spaces too, to have some space where we are around people in our industry, where we are going to be around other women that are walking through this path. So talk about in founding this business, why was it important to you to have a space that was women only?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we live in a world that is men and women, right? And that's the world we have to operate in. But women are over half of the population, and I think, more women graduate college than men, but very quickly you start to see that women don't get paid as much, we don't get the same opportunities, so the workplace really isn't supporting us equally in that. And I think what I've found, as I've got older and through my career and watching other women around me, is that after years and years of kind of operating in that environment, things start to weigh down on you and things start to get heavy. For every kid a woman has, their salary drops a couple percent. For every kid a guy has, their salary goes up a few percent. And then there's the motherhood penalty where women are seen as less committed and less competent. So I think, we want to kind of just basically give women a space where they can kind of stop, regroup, kind of think about what's going on, understand themselves, lose a little bit of the baggage that we've built up over the years, and then kind of come together and support each other to give ourselves the tools and kind of like the space to kind of grow, and then go back out in the world and advocate for ourselves and ask for the pay rise, or change the job or quit the job that's making us miserable because we felt like we had to be in it to fit into this kind of mold. And women are often said to be competitive or trying to kind of, be catty, and I think what we've seen particularly over the last 2 years, I was in very female-friendly environments in media and beauty and interior design, but I have been blown away seeing what happens when you put a group of women together in a room to kind of air out issues or support each other. Like, people will say, hey, I'm struggling with this in my business, and it's like, woof, like 5 women, like, I'll connect you to this person, or I'll help you with that. And it's just been so magical to see that happen and that come to life. And gosh, we're not anti-men in any way. Like, my dad has always been really like a cheerleader for me going out and kind of getting a degree and kind of getting a job and starting a company. My husband's really supportive, but there is just a moment in time, I think, where we just need some space to talk about stuff. I've seen women filter stuff so much in mixed environments that, gosh, when you put a group of women together, that filter is off, and it happens really, really quickly. We had our real estate landlord came to one of our events. He says, hey, before you sign this lease with me, I want to come to one of your events. And we were like, oh boy, this was a science of happiness conversation. I was like, I'm not sure how this is going to go. He's like an older dude, like white dude, and real estate, very bro-y. And so we were like, okay. And this was a group, I think there's like 20 women in the room, and I think we had at least 5 people cry in that session. It was like a really good kind of heartfelt session. And I was like, I don't know how this is going to go. And then he had said earlier he was going to leave, so I kind of walked out with him, and he's like, oh my God. He's like, these women just met each other. I was like, like some had never met before. He says, how are they so vulnerable so quickly with each other? He's like, oh, I get it. This is not a co-working space. Like, why would anyone ever leave after having an experience like that? And I think for him, the penny kind of dropped that, it was a perfect storm. It was the week of the Kavanaugh hearings. He has a daughter at UGA, so I think there was a lot of stuff going on, but it was a perfect storm, and he just kind of saw that this vulnerable space was really important for women to have. And so I think that's what we're trying to build with the Lola.
Yeah, I think the reality is that men have just out-organized women, and we say that we want to build the old boys club for women, but better. And early on, we actually sent out a survey. We got a couple hundred responses, and one of the questions was, do you think that men should be allowed in the space? Why or why not? And that was so interesting because, I laughed. There were some fun answers. But in general, it was, one that comes to mind was, so it would just be like any other space in the entire world. So we were like, okay, so, women are craving this space. If you think about our physical spaces around us, they're all, for the most part, still designed for men. We talk about the weight of doors, the temperature in offices, airbags, prescription medication. Some of them have not even been tested on women since as late as 2006 or 2008. It's just still very hard. We're more than half of the population. We're still underserved and undersupported. So for us, we're excited to have that space where it's just for us, our priorities to support our members and figure out how to amplify their careers, their businesses, et cetera. So we're really excited to do that.
Yeah. Dara, can you speak to the moment when you know you should step away from an idea that you started? I think you alluded to this a little bit in one of your answers earlier, but sometimes when we start an idea, it becomes a part of us. It becomes a part of how people identify with us, and to think about walking away from that or stepping away from it and letting, kind of Dana was speaking to this too, letting other people come into leadership, that can feel like you're giving away this chunk of you. So how do you know when it's time to stop or when it's time to say, I need to let someone else come in and run this, I need to take a step back?
It's really interesting that you said that because I'm in that place like really deeply right now in the process of selling one of my companies. And while that's happening, you hit this wall of the identity of this is a part of me, and then you realize, like Dana said, that it's not just a part of you, that it should have legs beyond that, and if you want it to serve in the way that you set out for, you have to open that up. And so even with the Network Under 40, the networking events company, same thing happened. I remember waking up one day 2 years into the business, and all of a sudden out of nowhere we were in Inc. magazine, and I was getting inbound stuff from people all over the world being like, help me start an event, help me start an event. And I would just get on the phone with all of them one by one and say, here's some tips, here's some strategies, and they'd circle back and say, it's not working. And so I was like, well, maybe I should really systemize this and grow it outside of myself. And I was super scared, like Dana had said, about I'm really particular and I want people to have a certain experience, and how's that gonna work in another city that I don't know, and who's gonna show up, and how are they gonna run it, and when I can't be lording over the whole thing, what's gonna happen? And I had to, for me, it wasn't a throw myself over the cliff. It was a tiptoe in. And so I started somewhere where I was more comfortable. I grew up in Baltimore, and I started there where I had a community, and I kind of knew the person who was starting it. And then I kind of got my swimmies on and was like, okay, it's like in the deep end, but I have a floating device and I'm okay. And I started moving around the country doing that because each step made me more comfortable and gave me more confidence. And this doesn't correlate, but I think it's important to say, I feel like someone's gonna need to hear this. This idea of confidence, I think too, is something that's a little bit of a false narrative, that everyone's like, once you're confident, you do the thing. And I think that often you get confident by doing the thing. And so something that I've really grappled with and held on to is what I call borrowed confidence, where there's been many times in my career where someone has come and saddled up beside me and said, like Deepak Chopra and I have a weekly video series, which like still my jaw hits the floor when I think about this. And when he came to me and said, hey, I think you can help make my work less esoteric and more understandable to people. And I was like, huh? Like me? Like there's billions of people on this planet. Why are you asking me this question? And I, in that moment, did this thing where I was like, I'm gonna borrow confidence that Deepak sees in me until I can grow into it and believe it myself. And so the same thing with businesses and with stepping away and with identity, that I just had to know and believe that if life was pulling me in a new direction and this thing wasn't serving that in the same way, or that I wasn't serving it anymore, that I had to let go of some of that ego of I'm the best suited to do it, and that wasn't my natural proclivity in the first place.
Yeah, great. Let's take some questions out here. Do you have any questions for our panel? Because we are recording, I'm going to repeat your question over the microphone just so we have it for our people who are watching and aren't here with us live. Any questions out there? Yeah. How do you find opportunities to continue developing yourself? Great question. Anybody?
Dana mentioned this, but I think we talked a little bit about being self-aware, knowing your strengths and weaknesses, and then pulling on people who you believe have a strength that you don't. I think understanding that is really important. I've learned so much. My last company, we recruited 22-year-olds out of college, and someone asked me recently, who's your mentor? And I was like, oh gosh, can I say like all of these 22-year-olds that I still keep in touch with because they're so ambitious and inspiring, and I still talk to them all the time. But just kind of letting down your guard and knowing that you can learn from anyone. And then for us, our community, we've been really adamant and intentional about building it with diversity across the board, age, industry, background, perspective. And a thing that we love about our women are that they come to an event, they say they always learn something, because they normally, in your office or at home, in your personal life or your friends, you tend to kind of have groups of like-minded but also similar backgrounds, and just kind of breaking out of that and just knowing that I might be talking to a tattoo artist or an estate planning attorney, but I'll learn something from them even though I don't believe I have anything in common with them.
Yeah, and I'll add to that. I mean, I think it kind of makes me sad how we train people to become leaders in the world. I think often, and I've seen it time and time again, people get promoted into leadership roles because they're good at the job, but then nobody gives them the tools and the skills and the training and the support to be a great leader, and then they're suddenly expected to lead a team of 5, 10, 15, 20, 100 people with like no skills to do that. And I think they hang on to the job because that's what they know best, but their job is now 80% leading people. And so I think all of us should, work to kind of develop those skills and find those skills where, where companies are letting us down, make sure that we're kind of leaning on people around us, whether it's our peers or our mentors or 22-year-olds coming out of college. I think, I think that is something, a muscle that we have to stretch and practice and grow, and is a work in progress always. Like, I think we're probably never finished products as leaders, and something that, I've definitely made my mistakes over time, but something I strive for every day is to be, how can I be the best leader? How can I bring the people around me up? And what can I do that's going to help support and grow them?
So one of the things that I really hold on to is Jim Rohn's really well-known adage of, you are the average of the 5 people with whom you surround yourself, and being super intentional about that. And there's a bigger law called Dunbars Law that talks about basically 155 people. It's the 5, 50, and then 100 people around that are the spheres of people who influence you and you keep in your network, in your circle. And Dana and I were talking about this before we hopped up here, that I think it's so important to learn from the people who are around you, and with that you have to do intentional housekeeping, and you have to think about, who are the people I'm inviting into my life and are not just there because you've left them there since you were 3-year-old playmates. And it doesn't mean that you are cruel to people, it doesn't mean that you kick them out meanly, but it means that you have to be intentional about, who are the inner circle of 5 that are really deeply impacting me, who are the 50 outside of that are really the ones that I'm seeing on a weekly, bi-weekly or so basis, and then who are the 100 out that like you're gonna invite to a bigger event or you're keeping up with. And you have to balance that with, who are your referral partners, who are your customers, like they all have to fit in there. Everyone else are your social media contacts in the ether outside of that. And so there's this real intentionality about it. And then one other thing I wanna build on is what Eileen said about mentorship, because I think there's also a bit of a misconception about how we get mentored and how we seek them. And so really quickly, I'm gonna run through what I think are the 5 styles of mentorship. One is the traditional one of like wooden desk, someone sits with their like big leather chair and they're very lopsidedly pouring one-sided into you, and it's very heavy lift for them, of probably they're nurturing you, they're trying to grow you into something, and or they see something of themselves in you, so they're willing to do it. These are great, but I think that there's 4 other ways that are way easier asks for you and for them, and not as heavy of commitment. So the second is reverse mentorship, which is a lot like what Eileen is talking about. A lot of Fortune 500s are doing this now, where if you're in a stage in your career, your life, or you're making a transition and you feel like, what do I have to offer? Because again, I think giving and value centricity are some of the most important things in how you develop relationships in the world. It should always be about, what can I give, not what can I take? And if you don't believe me, there's studies on this. Read Adam Grant's book, Give and Take, to learn the proof behind it. But in a case like this, it allows you to demonstrate that you have something to give to someone who's later in their career. Dana said the same thing about her interns, that you can reverse mentor someone and offer them immense value that maybe you're taking for granted in yourself. 3 is co-mentorship. I did this with a friend years ago, where she wanted to learn about scaling a business and I wanted to learn about digital marketing, and we made an intentional decision for a certain period of time to create boundaries around, how are we going to co-mentor each other, and then decide when this will naturally end. The 4th one is mentoring moments. So this could be like at a moment like this, at this here, where either you're meeting someone as you're moving about and you learn something from them, or there's someone who is maybe high profile that you get to talk to at a conference you go to, maybe whomever the keynote is here, and you have one question and you ask them and you spend a couple minutes and you get to take that morsel with you. And then the last one is from afar. It's this concept that your mentor doesn't have to know you. That there are people like Deepak was for me, where I was constantly ingesting his content and learning from it, and he didn't know that I existed. And I'm sure we all have these intellectual heroes and people from whom that we can learn, and that's one of the most beautiful things about the information age that we're in now.
Yeah. Other questions? Yeah. Okay, let me see if I can say that right. Okay, so based on anyone up here's experience in cities other than Atlanta, what recommendations would they have to help improve startup culture here? Yes, answers.
I think it depends what you're building, and being here in the startup sort of seen for the past few years. I've heard frustration if you're a tech startup, and Atlanta is big on software as a service and fintech, and I've heard people say, I wanted to stay in Atlanta, but I couldn't raise any money here, so I left. And a part of me thinks, don't give up. We need to put in more effort than that means. But I think it totally depends on the type of business and what you're looking to get. I think New York and Silicon Valley are just more concentrated. If anything, moving down here, I was excited about the opportunity to make an impact here. There are a lot of female-forward spaces popping up all over the country and the world, and there was not one in Atlanta, so we really wanted to make that happen sooner than later. But I think it's just a matter of, someone told me it's been going on for longer in a place like New York versus Atlanta, so there are opportunities, but there are also challenges with that, and you just have to find the right people to support you. And one of the best advice I got moving down here is, I knew I wanted to start something. I knew I wanted to do it with somebody. I didn't know what it was. I was open to ideas. And someone said, keep doing what you're doing. Keep meeting for coffees. Keep articulating what you think you want to do and you believe that you want to do. And that'll bring the right people in. So I had so many coffees before I moved down here, when I first moved down here. And eventually someone said, I know who you should meet, Martine. So it's challenging because I think it's still somewhat new and nascent in investments, in impact investing has been huge in New York for years, and it's just coming to Atlanta, things like that. So I think, again, there's exciting opportunities to be at the forefront of those things, but it then, in time, as it matures, then perhaps it'll be able to reach more people. It's so different. I can't pros and cons it.
And one thing I would say is we have Zoom and the internet, so most people that I know that are getting investment don't live anywhere near the people that are investing in them, which brings me back to the idea of maybe you're not telling the story how it really lives in your heart. Because if somebody hears about what you love and how you think it's going to change our world, if they really hear that story, you've heard it from someone, you're like, wait, what did you just say? That will motivate investment. It'll motivate them telling a friend and a friend and a friend. So I would just be okay and be really open to criticism of, people ripped that business plan apart of mine. And that was my only rule. I said, I'm going to give this to you. Don't you tell me one thing that you like about it. I want to hear everything that you don't like about it. And I did that, I'm saying 20, 30, 40 times until it came back to me of, wow, everyone keeps talking about this part. So be okay that maybe it's just you, and you have the opportunity to refine that story a little bit more, because if our world needs it, someone's going to fund it, and you're going to find that. The one other thing I would just add on people in your world, I call it my wise counsel, and I think it's very interesting to say this. I don't think I've really even thought through this, but most of my wise counsel are men. And it's interesting to me because I think, since I'm a woman and I think like a woman, I love to hear other perspectives and learn from men, because I work a lot with men. A lot of our vendors are men, and a lot of the partnerships. So I love to hear what I would call a less emotional approach to my problem, because I'm like, you're not going to believe this. They're like, Dana, it's not that big a deal. And I love kind of being grounded into that. So I would just make sure to open up your mind, because this is my people, this is my happy place. The conversations we could have right now, and then just the other side of let's understand the world we're playing in, because we do want this to be this awesome, equal place that we're all sitting at the table, and we're all creating ideas that are incredible for all of us and our families and all of that. So it's really kind of crazy to me that, I have text groups. I've got a Bad Moms text group. I've got a Rosemary Rascals text group. I've got all these groups. I've got a Lionel Richie text group as of last night. If anybody went to that was amazing. But then I have my wise counsel who are just going to tell me straight up from a different perspective. So be open to the people that are going to tell you straight up what's not okay with what you're trying to propose, because that's going to refine it to be the best shiny version that I know will survive in our world.
Let's close with one final question. If you can give a short answer of one thing you wish someone would have told you before you started as our closer. one thing.
I wish that someone would have told me that I am no religiosity meant by this, the savior of my own story, that I should be my own biggest cheerleader and that I can't wait around for someone to make something happen, that I have to take the lead and then collaboration is important after that.
I think for me, the thing I've kind of learned in the last 18 months, 2 years, is I came out thinking about the idea and how I was going to make the world better and what I was going to do for other people. What I didn't really bank on was how I'd have to not change my own story, but start to articulate my own story. I think when you're in a company or working for a brand, you're telling your story through that lens always. And when I came out and started a business, I realized I had to be vulnerable, open, honest, and really articulate my story of who I am and why I'm doing this, because that was important for people to understand what we were building. It was important for us to raise money. And somewhere along the way, I was like, oh, British people don't talk about themselves, ever. So I can't do this. And I think that was a real struggle for me. I think it really tripped me up for a while because I was like, I had to really think about what that story was. So yeah, I wish someone had said, hey, you're going to have to talk about yourself a lot.
I started off my career in technology consulting for 6 years, so full-time travel, crazy hours, miserable. And I wish someone had told me, because I thought about quitting a lot, and then the recession happened, and I didn't. I wish someone had told me, and I considered myself very risk-adverse, isn't it riskier to just stay here and do nothing, for 6, 10, 20 years, than to just try anything else? Because you can always go back to this. It'll always be there. I'm a firm believer of that. It's you can stay in your job or take what I think is an opportunity, and if it doesn't work out, if you do realize it's not right for you, that other thing will always be there. Something will always be there.
That's all great. I'm like, wish I had my note in my journal. Someone writing this down, you can give this to me later. I would say the idea of make sure you're having fun at it. I mean, it's so easy for me, at least, to get my head down and just go. And that, I don't think that's the whole goal, is just to build something and then check off that you did it. I mean, I was really happy with one little store. And we're 40 plus and growing like crazy. And like, I used to think I wanted to get to a number, but I just want to enjoy every piece of this, like thinking back to my opening day. So make sure that, you're dreaming really, really big for whatever it is that is and growing your heart, but that you're enjoying it. That it can, I promise you, it can come off the radar and people would come up and like, oh, congratulations, it's so amazing. I'm like, I think so. I think I might be missing it. So don't miss it. My husband's a big fan of Stop and Smell the Roses, and I used to be like, stop saying that, that's ridiculous. But that is my mantra right now, is just enjoy it. And when you're writing that and you're not sleeping, just make sure that you're like, but taking a minute to be grateful, like, I'm doing this, and it feels awesome every day. Don't wait for like 5 years or till you get your funding or till it's right now awesome that you get to even dream about doing it.
One sentence. Happiness is not a destination, it's now. It's when. It's not when I get to, or it's not when I get X, Y, or Z, it's now. And if you don't choose to have that now, like Dana said, you've missed it.
Can we give it up for our panel? It's awesome. Thank you all.